Welcome to the Anthro to UX podcast, where you will learn how to break into UX with an anthropology degree. Through conversations with leading anthropologists working in user experience, you will learn firsthand how others made the transition, what they learned along the way, and what they would do differently. We will be discussing what it means to do UX research from a practical perspective and what you need to do to prepare a resume and portfolio. I'm your host, Matt Artz, a business anthropologist specializing in design anthropology and working at the intersection of product management, user experience, and business strategy. Let's get started. All right, hi everyone, welcome back. This is Matt Artz of Anthro to UX. I'm here today with Qingyan Ma, design research lead at Memorial Sloan Kettering, also in previous UX roles at Memorial Sloan. Previously to that, a user researcher at NYU Health, and received a PhD in medical anthropology from Temple University in Philly. And so today we're going to talk a little bit particularly on, I would like to cover kind of medical anthropology as a background coming into UX, really, what it looks like to transition into health research and, UX in health, seeing as that's something I haven't done on the show yet. So thanks for coming on today. Really looking forward to it. So would you start by telling everybody, a little bit about, expand on your background, how you came into anthropology? I know your undergrad was in, it was not anthropology. So would you mind maybe sharing why you switched and kind of going through the education?
Sure. It's a long story. I think when I started, my undergraduate is in English. So, and it was in China. So I studied English in University of Economics and Finance. So basically the English we studied is not English literature. It's basically very applied English in economics and trade and finance. So in terms of job prospect, if you study English related to economics, it will very easy to find a job in in the bank, in the financial industry. And most of my undergraduate classmates cohort, they work in those area. But I think for me, when I study economics, I don't really like economics principle, like everyone is rational, you make rational choice. I don't think people are always rational. So I was looking for what make people make decisions. And I find there's behavioral economics and there's especially economic anthropology. They study, real human behavior, real human decision making. That I think the first draw for me in anthropology. So when I finished my undergraduate, I actually went to teach English in the countryside for a year, and then applied graduate school in anthropology in China. So I went to the anthropology department for my master's in Yunnan University in Guangzhou. It's the oldest anthropology department in China, also the best, but people will argue about that, but we think we are the best in China, anthropology department. And after that, I went to Temple University to study anthropology in PhD.
Great.
So that's
Thanks.
My transition from basically business finance to anthropology.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And it's, your comment about rational is interesting to me too, because when I was younger and just sort of reading, I come from a business background as well. And so we like reading the text, it always just innately feel like there was something wrong with that. And of course, behavioral economics has done a great job of sort of disproving that in more recent years. But yeah, there was always a friction there, and that never quite made sense. And I didn't have the opportunity of coming across anthropology in undergrad, but I could certainly see how, having that experience, whenever somebody gets that experience, they could also sort of start to poke holes in that kind of rationality argument, and along with numerous other subjects, of course. But it's so it's still an interesting path, though, coming from that background and then making the transition to medical. So did you, by the time you chose to go to Temple, you obviously, I presume you had already kind of picked in your mind that you were going to do medical? And
yes.
So why
that's
that?
Interesting. So it goes to my master's degree in Yunnan University. So in the beginning, I thought because my background in economics, I would study economic anthropology for sure. But then in Sun Yat-sen University, the mentor was assigned. So they assigned me a mentor who's a medical anthropologist. I think he's also the first medical anthropologist in China. He wrote the first textbook in medical anthropology in Chinese. So I feel very lucky to study with him and to transition to medical anthropology. But in the beginning, I was worried because I didn't have any medical background. I wasn't major in biology or human any, science related subject. I was majored in English and economics. But then they told me you don't need to have too much medical background. And Guangzhou is a very interesting city. It's a very international metropolitan city, and it is like international city, like a port, import and export city for over 1,000, maybe 2,000 years. It's at least 1,000 years is like the port city in China. So it has all this influence from all over the world, Europe, Africa, all parts of Asia, all come together in Guangzhou. So its medicine is very interesting. And so I was drawn to traditional Chinese medicine in Guangzhou. So my master's thesis is to study the social construction of traditional Chinese medicine in the hospital. So that's my thesis. And I did my field work. That was more than 15 years ago. Long time ago. That's my first fieldwork research in the hospital, and it also the start of my career as a medical anthropology and my career in hospitals. So that's the start, and the rest of the story is I just stay in the medical field.
So just to stay on that for a bit, because it's interesting, I'm curious to hear a little bit about given the metropolitan sort of nature of the city, I'm assuming that there's some Western medical influence there, like in terms of like kind of classic Western biomedicine. So how was that sort of negotiated? How did traditional Chinese medicine come together with Western bioscience?
That's an excellent question, and it is exactly why my interest in traditional Chinese medicine. Remember, my research is in the hospital. It's the Guangdong Provincial Hospital of Traditional Chinese Medicine. But I touch on the purpose. I touch on the topic about social construction of traditional Chinese medicine, because as a hospital, hospital is like a biomedical institution, biomedical science. It's not traditional Chinese medicine in our traditional thinking is a very small clinic, one doctor treating patient. It's alternative medicine. But in China, at least in this hospital, it's totally a Western biomedical model. It is like any modern hospital. So the hospital operating in the way of what they call is integrated Chinese and Western medicine. So it is, in practice, it's dual diagnosis, dual prescription, dual examination. So they will diagnose you in both biomedical way. They will do blood work. They will do CT, they will do MRI. They do all those biomedical, Western medicine, modern technology to diagnose you. They also use traditional Chinese medicine technique to diagnose you, like check your pulse, look at your facial expression, look at your tongue. So dual diagnosis. And in the prescription or treatment, it's dual treatment. You will receive Chinese medicine treatment, acupuncture. In the meantime, you will receive antibiotics. So everything is dual, and this is how they constructed as integrated medicine.
Got it.
And still in the name of traditional Chinese medicine.
So that's interesting, because when I went to the University of North Texas, it was an applied program, and so we would, in our sort of non-core classes like a business anthropology class or a design anthropology class, we always had applied projects that were with corporations. And so we did one with Baylor Health, and we were looking at patient satisfaction for Southeast Asian patients. And a lot of the, though they were, in like Western biomedicine sort of measures of success or outcomes, they were basically having the same outcomes as all other patients, but from a satisfaction perspective, it was lower. So I'm curious to maybe relate that back to your experience if possible, and even think of it in like a UX or kind of service design perspective. If you were to reflect on it now, do you think that those patients were having a better experience as a result of having both?
Exactly. So earlier I touched on the dual diagnosis, dual treatment prescription. That is on the hospital side, right? Hospital side construct this traditional Chinese medicine in this method. But for patient, why they still choose this hospital of traditional Chinese medicine? Because they have their understanding of what is the best for them. They think integrated medicine is the best for them. So in their sense, biomedicine, Western medicine always have, side effect, too much side effect, like antibiotics is very powerful, but it can make you very weak. So I need traditional Chinese medicine to make me feel better. I need acupuncture. I need herbs to nourish me. And this hospital can do the best because they are the hospital of traditional Chinese medicine. So that is why from patient perspective, they are looking for what is the best for them. And for the hospital side, they know what patients are looking for, and they are specialized in doing both. So at the end, there is the interface. What is the best? Patients think this is the best. Hospital provide what is the best. So I think that's what my thesis is about.
Yeah, interesting. And it's sort of similar to what we found, which is to say that, again, the various Southeast Asian populations oftentimes wanted, whether it was Ayurvedic or traditional Chinese medicine, kind of, if they were maybe Malay or brought in to the process, as well as things like considerations for food being served and, family structure, like how many family members could you have there and how could they stay overnight, right? Basically sort of more mimicking what they would have experienced elsewhere at home. So interesting to just kind of connect those. And so now to maybe zoom forward. So, you go through Temple, you come out with your medical anthropology degree, you have this previous experience where, in fact, you kind of were looking at the experience of patients, but maybe you weren't thinking in those terms, but today you're working sort of in experience-based roles at first at NYU Health and now at Memorial Sloan. So how did all of that sort of help you get into these health roles? How did you make that transition? Did you realize that you had all those sort of applicable knowledge and skills, or did it take you a little to figure out that UX was a way to apply that?
So I think for me, First of all, I'm a researcher in healthcare before I'm a UX researcher. In UX, mostly what I'm doing is digital products. So we do design research or user experience research of digital products. In other words, that's technology, health technology in hospital. So if you just study talking about products or tech, then UX makes total sense. But for me, before I'm a UX researcher on tech or product, I'm a researcher in healthcare. So I think from that line, it's always consistent. I didn't transition that much. It's always consistent. I started my career 15 years ago in the hospital, and still up to this day, I'm still working in the different hospital, but still in the hospital. And all those structure, all the tension in the hospital, all the tension between patient, provider, hospital, staff, it's all the same. What add into my portfolio is the tech and product space.
Mm-hmm. So how was that, for you? Because obviously, so even though you were sort of already accustomed to, the sort of habits and rituals of like what happens in the healthcare physical space, the language of tech is very different, even potentially the pace, could be maybe, I know healthcare is generally frantic, but we have a certain cadence in tech, when developing products. So what did that transition look like? How did you go about sort of learning the language of tech?
Yeah, I think that for me, that's the part of transition. I think it starts with my postdoc at UNC Chapel Hill. My postdoc is on HIV/AIDS, HIV cure. Is in the landscape of global health. So in the HIV world, a lot of study we're looking at was so-called intervention. And as a social scientist or as a behavioral scientist or public health, the intervention we're looking at are usually non-medical intervention because we cannot invent a new drug or treatment. What we're doing is mostly this behavioral intervention, like improving drug adherence, medication adherence. And those interventions we're looking at more and more, we are looking at technology intervention. So in the old days, maybe 15 years ago, they are thinking about sending text messaging to patients to remind them taking medication. That's the oldest technology intervention, sending text message. But these days, text message is so outdated. Let's think about building a website or an app to improve people's knowledge about medication, improve their behavior. So those are gradually, we are looking at this technology intervention, and we have to build an app or website. And at NYU, we started to do this. And because I'm a researcher on that, I have to study the user who are patient or stakeholder or clinician. I have to interview them. It's basically the same as I do research in my previous projects. But this time, the end product is we are going to build an app or website. And that is, user experience or design research, they have already established methodology or process of doing that. So I have to learn those to do my job. And so it's a very natural transition. And Memorial Sloan Kettering, so I'm the dedicated researcher to do that.
So, being a team of one is always interesting. It's interesting for me in a smaller consulting agency, but for you, a team of one in a hospital setting must be particularly interesting. Arguably you could find too many things that need to be researched, and obviously there's a limited capacity. So how are you going about sort of managing, being a team of one in a hospital where there must be so many competing demands?
So first of all, we are growing. We're growing, so we are going to hire more researchers. And second is, our hospital is also a large academic medical center. So there are a lot of researchers here. They are just not UX researcher or design or product researcher, but there are a lot of researchers here. So we can learn from them. And also we have, right now we also have a very good design team. So our designers are also design generalists. They do research. So you can find all these allies, and we are growing.
So, you use the word allies, which is interesting. I don't think anybody's used that term before, but I like it. There are all these adjacent roles, and sometimes we do like to feel like we are, maybe the authority, right? We come from a place from an academic background that maybe gives us particular insight. But the truth is other people can learn to do what we do as anthropologists, and they might just do it sort of innately, right? And there can be designers who are great researchers or even engineers. And so, I think it's always worth pointing that out, because we don't necessarily need to act like we're the only ones who can do this, because obviously if we work together in teams, we can build better products. So what are you... how does that come together for you in the hospital? Like, how are you working with some of these allies? Maybe you can't go into specifics of products or anything that you're working on, but how do you navigate sort of working together with all these different disciplines?
So I think most of us working on product are working in product teams. There is innately multidiscipline. They are multidiscipline cleaner rate. So there are people from design or engineer or data science, or there's product manager. So I think people have different role play, but at the end, we all have the same goal. So I think coordination and collaboration is very important. I think a lot of people like to use the word pick up each other's brain. Sometimes we do that, and the goal is to, have a better product. I think before you started to work, I think alignment is very important. You have to align what you want to achieve, align your expectation, align your timeline, align your goal. And after that, after everybody's aligned, it's much easier to start. At certain point, you are going to, to do separate things. But constantly sync or update is very important. So it's so you're working in a team. You don't work alone. I think for people who transition from academia, is who are so used to work alone. Like I wrote my dissertation from start to the end. I manage everything, every aspect of my dissertation. But right now, when you are working in product space, you are not alone. You work in team. The team is as almost as one person. Mm-hmm. And you may be the eyes, somebody may be the ears, but you have to coordinate so you can have a good sense about what's going on.
Your point of working alone obviously is true, but something we don't always frame it this way is that when in the field, you are collaborating, right? So yes, like a thesis or dissertation is sort of a solo project, but it isn't also to say that we don't collaborate, because obviously the nature of doing research in the field is very collaborative. And so, I want to point that out just for anybody who's listening, who's thinking of how to reframe, that academic experience. Those are skills they have. And they also have things like project management, right? Of course, because of managing the project, which brings up, a question about that for you. So, if you mentioned product teams, but you as one person can't be embedded in one product team. So I imagine you're touching multiple product teams, in a sort of a shared model. So that would imply then that you're doing a bit of project management, maybe even recruiting, and of course, research and analysis across multiple projects. So anything that you've learned from balancing maybe multiple at once?
Yeah, I think find a good framework is very good. It's very important. The framework about research planning, and so not just I started this framework. Everyone should use it. I think it's also bring all the team members, all the collaborators into one space, and we collaboratively develop this framework. It's very important. So it's not like I decide everything and I just top down, I give them, you should use it. That's never going well. You have to learn how to empower people and co-create, co-develop is very important. So talking about collaboration is, it's almost like cliche, everyone's collaborative, but how really start the collaboration is very important. And at the end of the day, you want people to use it. So people will use something because they have part in it. So that's the basic reason you need to co-develop, co-create different frameworks, different templates, different processes.
Yeah, great. So, another thing that I think is interesting about the health space, obviously ethics, cuts across all of the work we do, especially being researchers. And there are certainly some industries where it's maybe even more, where its ethical challenges are very present, like particularly around AI today. But in the health space, it's very present through a lot of the work we do. And so, in my case, when I was studying, consumer genetics, obviously you can probably appreciate the implications of, presenting data like that to people, that quite frankly may not be accurate because we don't fully understand multi-genetic conditions yet, and the way that they may change their health behaviors. That's just one example. There's I'm sure many more in your daily work life. So can you speak to, maybe not giving specific like ethical challenges if you can't because of like any sort of privacy with work, but just can you speak of what, how you're navigating ethics in the medical workspace?
Actually, there's a medical space. It's the one of the maybe the most heavily regulated area in doing any kind of research, even like clinical research or behavioral research or social science research in medical space. You are heavily regulated by HIPAA. First of all, if HIPAA, HIPPA, it's the health it's the regulation how to protect PHI. PHI is protected health information. So those are the things like regulate everything we are doing. So so first you have to comply to HIPAA everything. I think that is very challenging. So sometimes when we do research, I know for all of us, when you are doing research, there's constraints. But for healthcare, constraints is even bigger than you imagine. So you have to be very creative, and maybe not start from recruiting people to interview them. That may not be the very good first step. Maybe first step is to do a lot of desktop research to understand what's going on and recruit specific people for your research and compliant to HIPAA.
Got it. And how much of your work has to go through, any kind of internal review, before
usually because our most in the product space, our project is under the category of quality improvement. It's lower risk. So usually we don't need to go through IRB. But if your project has to collaborate with a clinician, a clinical researcher, you have to go through IRB.
Got it. So, and back to the constraints. So you said maybe you start with desktop research, but can you maybe elaborate on the constraints a little bit more and, just how you've been dealing with them aside from the desktop research?
I think the constraints, one of the is you cannot collect people's patient, PHI. And first, for a lot of people, what is PHI is is a good question, because PHI, if I know your name, is that PHI in your date of birth and which street you are in, your age. So basically, PHI is anything that can make other people to identify you. Mm-hmm. You cannot collect any PHI. Sometimes, if you have to collect PHI, how to store it, how to protect it, it's protected health information. How to protect it, you need to have very clear guidance about how to protect the PHI, and basically you don't collect PHI. And sometimes, I know in the product space, if it's not in healthcare, you develop this version, you test it with this person, maybe 6 months later, you have another version. You want to try to test with the same person to say any changes. But for us, we can't, because we don't collect their PHI. We don't know who they are. We don't want to know who they are. So that's kind of the constraints you have to face.
So for people who are, really interested in the health space, but maybe don't come from a medical anthropology background, how do you think that they can, what would you say that they should be doing to make a transition into health?
I think health is a very, very big area. So I think, in my view, there are at least 3. One is the healthcare, like the center, like hospitals, different kinds of hospitals. And another big part is those pharmaceutical companies. they are another big player in healthcare. And I think the third part may be medical devices companies. In addition to these big three, there are all kinds of this healthcare tech startup. So I think those are probably the three or four big areas. I think in these different areas, the demand for design research or UX research varies. I think hospital is probably the place where I think almost all the hospital would think their mission is patient first, right? All the healthcare, they will tell you we are patient first. So maybe this is a good place because they are actually make human beings first. So that is a good start for UX researcher because we are doing human-centered design. We need somewhere that center human first. But in other places, they like pharmaceutical, they are developing medications. So their mission is on the medication itself, on the drug itself. And in the meantime, they still need to think about patient experience, about taking this medication or different ways of monitor clinical trials or doing digital clinical trials. So that is where they would like design or UX research. Medical device is another interesting place because in medical device, you really need a human being to interact with that device. The human being can be the clinician, physician, or the patient who's using like thermometer. Thermometer is example, those medical device. So they actually have to pay attention to human experience. For all those health tech startup, those company, it's too big. There are a lot of out there. I don't even know how to comment on that. Yeah. So I think those are the different areas in healthcare in general. I think if you want to transition, so you don't need a healthcare background to get into the healthcare user research. Because when they have the demand to hire a UX researcher or design researcher in healthcare, which usually means they are in the product space. They have a product they want to develop. They need help to develop this product. So you need to be a very good product researcher or design researcher, user experience researcher. That's I think that's the baseline requirement, and your healthcare experience or background is preferred.
Got it. How about, so basically what I'm hearing there is really, any maybe social science degree that lends itself to product research is sufficient. It doesn't need to be medical anthropology. And that if you have additional health experience, obviously it's beneficial. Yeah. What about though, given the kind of the constraints you talked about earlier and the type of research you need to do, is there any particular research, methods, just sort of background in terms of skills that would be very useful for the health space? Or at least I should say like the hospital health space?
Hospital, I think some familiarity because in health space is there are basically two big areas. One is you do the product for the patient or health consumer. That is very similar to a lot of like consumer research, consumer product research, because you do the research for the patient. Another big area is the product you develop for the clinicians. Clinician is including physician, MDs, nurses, coordinators, medical assistant, all the people who work in the clinical space. So that may be a little bit challenging. You probably need to have a little bit like understanding different roles, maybe at least the different roles. And for different role, they will have different clinical workflow. You have to, it's not like you have to understand, but when you start the job, you probably need to pick up those quickly. If you have previous experience in the clinical space, that will be easier for you, but it's still not necessary. And another big question I got all the time for example, I work in a cancer hospital. Do you have to know something about cancer? The answer is yes and no. Yes, is because you probably have to know a little bit what is oncology, what is tumor, what is chemotherapy. But those are very easy. Because I'm not going to be an oncologist to treat patient. I will never be, and you don't need to be. But you still have to know a little bit what is cancer, what is tumor, how it is developed. Doing a little bit Google search, reading Wikipedia, even Wikipedia, I have to say, and maybe taking some courses on Coursera. There's those like cancer biology course. It will be very easier to pick up. I used to work on HIV/AIDS. That is very challenging. I don't know. My knowledge about HIV is basically similar to a lot of lay people, non-medical professional. But when I did my postdoc for HIV, my first start is to read a lot of anthropological work on HIV because that's easier for me. I can read anthropology. I like to read anthropologists writing on HIV. So that's my first step to get into HIV. After that, I already know what basic anthropologist stand on HIV. And I started to look at some medical journal on HIV. And during my postdoc, I had the privilege to went to all those medical seminar about HIV, about like HIV treating cure strategy, those international AIDS conference. I think that's another way for me to quickly pick up what is HIV, what is AIDS. So I think don't get intimidated by healthcare because you're not going to be a doctor. Your goal is not to treating patient. Your goal is to improve their experience. Even sometimes the patient they only have a few months to live, but you still want to improve their the quality of life in the next few months. So that's our goal. Our goal is not to cure anyone.
So you've spoke a few times of, working on projects that are patient facing, working on others that are clinician facing. So the ones that are clinician facing, are they presumably they tools that are used internally for the process of diagnosis and treatment?
Oh, sure. These days there's another big set of this health tech company. They are producing EHR, electronic health record, or electronic medical record. There are some big companies out there like Epic or Script, Cerner. Those are another, big bulk of those health tech They don't really call them health tech company. I don't know what they call them, but they do develop these interfaces for clinicians to process clinical data. And those are the systems clinicians are using.
Got it. And increasingly, physicians, or big hospital systems are starting to look at, or in some cases already test and use, machine learning for things like, visual identification potentially of, tumors, right, in fields like radiology. And so, have you had the opportunity to work, around any machine learning? And you can be vague if you can't speak about any specifics, but have you had the chance to touch on anything machine learning based yet?
I think machine learning is a buzzword because it's too vague. I think so those are the project will be like very innovative. I think we all work on those to some extent, but not to the level of the recognition of a tumor image is going to someday is going to replace radiologists. Far from that. I think it's very far from that. I think what we are doing machine learning in our for the clinician is maybe sometimes just very, very, very basic, like doctors they all writing notes, medical notes. Maybe I want to search the note. Maybe I will have a keyword to enter the keyword, and all the notes related to that keyword will pop up. It doesn't sound very fancy. It's very common, but those may be the first step. For those things like you are going to replace clinician at some point. Far away from that. I think there's a misunderstanding about healthcare is from tech, at least from some part in tech is going to replace doctors. I don't know whether you have heard of that. Doctors will be, someday their job, because the robot can do their job, they don't need doctors anymore. It's far away from that. I think for doctors, they are not. The misunderstanding of healthcare is to treat it as a hard science. You can use the robot to do the hard science. You can
decision
calculate
support.
You can put all the variables and the robot can do everything. But healthcare is about relationship. Healthcare, you're treating patient. Patient is a human. It's the relationship between the hospital, doctor, and the patient. It's a relationship. It's about trust. So I don't think machine can ever replace the trust, I don't think machine can do relationship building, basically.
Yeah, no, sure, I'm with you. But I think that's actually the interesting opportunity of machine learning as a broad discipline and how it's applied, particularly like in this case of image recognition, within maybe radiology, is really freeing up time potentially, right? Through decision support to focus on the trust and the relationships and building, building a relationship with the patient. We typically try to look at it as an enabler, of human interactivity, of human relationships, rather than a replacer of those, in the work that we do. And, where we can use it to sort of peel off some repetitive tasks, we like it, right? And then to kind of allow, a human to, do something that provides added value that maybe they didn't have the time to do previously.
I don't think it's added value. It's more like they can free them up from the work. They can focus on the patient more. Because I think when you go to see the doctor, a lot of us has the experience is the patient is looking at the computer typing, not looking at you.
Yeah.
A lot of cases, and none of the patient likes that. So maybe if you automate some tasks, the doctor can look at you, can talk to you. They don't need to type.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the good thought. I think it's it is developing. I'm not going to say we have anything tangible yet. And if you look at the whole healthcare like technology, that's the direction. But I don't think anyone has like the dominant product yet.
Got it. Aside from that potential, future in healthcare, is there anything else that you are really excited about in the ways that tech is going to contribute? So, and something kind of tangible that you see is on the horizon, not just maybe a possibility, but something you see coming.
I would think there's I did a project. We worked on a project using voice, and it actually won some award. I think from that perspective, I think using voice, like when you have a doctor and clinician, a patient and clinician have this conversation, the voice technology, they can record your conversation, listen to your conversation and automatically populate your note, the field, and tell you what's going on. So the clinician, I don't need to worry about taking down my note. I can just focusing on talking to you, and my note will come up.
Yeah, nice.
That's fantastic. I think that some company like Nuance is doing that, but I don't know whether it becomes like the dominant and I don't know about adoption on that. But from their demo, it's very promising.
Great. So I think I saw. Did you pitch South by Southwest talk? Did I see that? Right, correct.
Yes, I did.
Did you hear back yet? Has that decision been made?
No, I haven't. I didn't have time to follow up. I think when the decision is made, I will hear it.
Well, I remember looking at it on the site, and so can you maybe share with everybody, what that was about? It definitely sounded interesting.
Okay, so that is about we're building a research repository for our design research. And so the researcher, me, and other designers, when they do research, we put all our data in one place so we can speak to each other, we can collaborate, so we don't need to do duplicate research, and we can build the research on top of each other so we can do further. So that's the goal of the research repository.
Yeah, thanks. And so the reason I'm interested in it is, and I've asked this question to many people, like, people from Facebook, Amazon, smaller organizations, consulting companies, startups, you name it, like on the podcast and off. And nobody ever tells me that they have like a solution that really solves the problem. It either is hard to capture the data, it's hard to get buy-in and consistent use of it. And so it seems like, people make efforts in this space, and then over time there's like some entropy, and it's no longer in use. So seeing as you did pitch this to South by Southwest, can you elaborate on here on the podcast at all about what you're doing to address that problem?
So I think we are just getting started yet. So I haven't encountered the problem. It's not going to be used because we are just started. But I believe I think that's the problem of adoption. And when you have people switching from projects to projects, you have new people coming, you have people leave your team, and the practice is not consistent. And once eventually the adoption become lower and lower, and it sounds like a failure. So I think it's very hard to not. It's very hard to avoid that dilemma. But if you don't have it, even if you want to look at it sometime, it's just very hard. We have one example is somebody worked on the project for 2 months. 2 months later, she realized she just heard another researcher did the project before. 2 months later. So I think we try to avoid that. And as when you have a lot of things in your repository, and I think maybe repository will become the first step for people to look at when they want to do some research. I think in healthcare is we encounter, because none of us is, medical professional, or even if you're a medical professional, you only work in your role, like you are a nurse. You only work in your nurse role. You don't know oncologist is doing. So I think sometimes when we start a project, we probably want to look at what is a nurse, what is the oncologist, what did they say about things. So if we have a repository, maybe that's the first place we can look at. So it will be useful.
Sure, yeah. No, I mean, I built a relational database when I was doing my thesis work at UNT, for everything, and from, my literature reviews to all of the, primary research. And it's very helpful. And of course, I've built similar tools since. But it's, in the case of UNT, when it was just me, it was very easy to do, and I could do it my way kind of consistently over and over. But as you have other people, there's variation in the way data is often recorded, right? And something that's come up a few times, maybe 2 or so times on the podcast is, do you take a very broad look or a very sort of microscopic look in terms of what you're recording? And so there are varying viewpoints on that, you're recording really like every sort of small finding all the way up to, no, it's too much work, and we're just going to sort of blow that out to the sort of major insights or takeaways. And so where are you trying to live in that kind of continuum?
So I think, first of all, we probably want to, in terms of recording, if the meeting is very short, you probably doesn't need to record it. If you have those short meeting with like 5 people, 15 minutes each, you probably just want to write note. You can upload a note to the database. I think what's more important is the naming convention. For each project, you need to, I'm telling my researchers to name it as, date, quarter, the name of the project, in that way. So at least you know when it was done. So you can look at it. I think naming convention probably is like the most self-evident, easiest to do, but you have to insist because sometimes I just want to name it. Maybe version 1 for me is enough. But if you put it into the database, you are using that to have a conversation with all the other people you may not even know. So it's I think naming convention is the first step. And then you will develop this like universal code book, something like universal code book. It's not totally universal, but something like that. And it can also help you.
Great. So is there anything that you have coming up aside from South by Southwest, which I know we already touched on, but anything else you have coming up that maybe you want to mention, plug anything, whether it's work related or personal, or just, some tips you want to give to anybody who's looking to get into the field?
I think in terms of tips to get into the field, I think in healthcare, I mentioned before, don't get intimidated by healthcare because we are not the doctors. Remember, we're not the doctors. It is, sometimes it is good and bad. It is bad because we're not the doctors. I don't know so much knowledge. I don't know this medication. I don't even know the name. In healthcare medication, they have so many names, so many like names of your body parts. You will never get to know any of them. But don't get intimidated because we're not going to treat them. The benefit of not being the doctor is actually making you in a very objective stand. Because I'm not a doctor, I'm not going to treat you. I'm just trying to understand you. I think when I interview HIV patients, that was actually my benefit for myself, because sometimes the patient will say, "Oh, you are a PhD. Can you tell me what medication is good for me?" No, I can't. I'm not a doctor. That actually to my own benefit. I'm just trying to understand you. And very soon they understand, oh, you are not doctor. You are not going to treat me. You're not going to give me a miracle pill. Yeah, I'm just want to talk to you. I think that's actually the good part of not being a medical professional in the healthcare field.
Got it. Great. And so if people had questions and they wanted to maybe follow up with you to kind of learn a little bit more, how can they get in touch?
They can find me on LinkedIn. It's my name there on LinkedIn.
Okay. And I'll link to it, of course. So, Qingyan, thanks very much. Appreciate you coming on. It was great to talk to you and learn a little bit more about the healthcare space. So I'll post LinkedIn. I hope South by Southwest goes well. I would love to see you there and have another anthropologist there, and would be curious to hear how that project goes, how the repository goes over time. So thanks for coming on.
Sure, thank you. Are you going to South? Did you put anything for?
Not this year. We thought about it as an organization. Okay. We're working on something in the art space that's sort of dealing with addressing a number of issues in the art space, but also addressing diversity inclusion issues, the way we're sort of, based on some intellectual property we filed. We will probably apply to do something next year to sort of unveil that a little bit more by that time. But so not this year, but probably next year.
Yeah, so. It's my first submission, so I just want to see how far it can go.
Yeah, I'll be curious. We did one last year, but it was virtual, so I'm not sure of the impact. I know the year prior, Gigi Taylor, who spearheaded the one last year, her panel got great reviews, and she was basically asked to do it a second time while there. So there seems to be an appetite there. So I'm glad that that you did it, and hopefully you get in. We're rooting for you.
Okay.
So thanks again.
You.
Take care. Thank you all for listening to the Anthro to UX podcast. To learn everything you need to break into UX, visit anthro2ux.com. There you will find all the podcast episodes and career coaching resources. Please like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.